heard the conventional view.
Now prepare yourself to hear the other side.
High school teachers Mike Margison and Justin Spears bring you the alternative view you didn't get in the classroom. Now here they are, Margison, and Spears.
Oh yeah, coming with a little change up on you, coming on a Monday afternoon. You know, when you get into these periods of time in the summer, you make do when you can, and scheduling and getting everything together sometimes can be a little bit of a challenge, but nothing will stop the other side from coming through. So we are with you here on a Monday afternoon. Again, hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to us live through our YouTube feed. If not, as I've mentioned before, and we always start off the program with the potpourri of ways that you can listen to the show on demand. You can catch us on iTunes. You can catch us on the Spreaker radio app, Google Play Podcasts, all three of those. If you search The Other Side with Margison and Spears, you have to search for all of that. The Other Side with Margison and Spears, you will find our show, and you can subscribe to it, and you'll get the automatic notification each week when a new show is available for you. And you can download that, listen to that on your mobile device, in your car, however you, whatever works for you. You can get us in more traditional media. We are on WCVL here in West Central Indiana, 92.1 FM, 1550 AM out of Crawfordsville. As we always say, we appreciate the support over there. At 8 a.m. on Saturdays, you can hear a rebroadcast of this show on that radio station, or you can listen online at WCVLAM.com. I did a Facebook Live about 30 minutes ago where I kind of went through as I was prepping for the show, and I said, you know what, we're a part of the Cerberus Radio Network, and I don't think I do a good enough job kind of promoting that, letting all of our followers, especially those who follow me through Facebook, know that we're a part of that radio network, and there is just some phenomenal programming over there. You can catch that Facebook Live that I did promoting all of the different programs that are on there, but we are a part of the Cerberus Radio Network. You can get, that means you can get our show on a radio code. That's RADIO -CO. And you can get, or excuse me, not -.co. And you can get our show rebroadcast there, I believe at 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday. They'll cycle through all of our shows. And of course, you can get our library of previous shows through our YouTube page. So there is a myriad of ways that you can get our show. Hopefully you're able to take part in one of those. So without further ado, let's bring in the other side of the other side, Mr. Mike Margison. Mike, what's going on, man?
Not much. We're on the downslide now. Once you hit July 1st, it's like school's right there. So summer's closing.
It is rapidly. And this summer has been really odd in terms of scheduling for me. Coaching boys golf, we didn't get done until after the 1st of June. Once I wrapped up our awards banquet and everything, and then having golf camp. And now here we are already into July. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'll be coaching girls golf this year, which starts before school. So I actually will be starting with that here in a couple of weeks. So yeah, it's been a little bit of an odd summer for me, but I've enjoyed it. It's given me an opportunity to recharge the batteries. And I know just the downtime and getting into things that I don't normally get a chance to do during the school year is always enjoyable. And most importantly, to be able to spend some time with my family, you know, my boys, and my wife and I did a trip over to Cincinnati for the weekend. So those are always good times there. So without further ado, let's jump into the content for this show. We've kind of been on a theme here with some education related shows, and obviously us being public school educators, that kind of makes sense. It's one of the things that we had started off with as themes in our shows, you know, looking at things from an economic and historical perspective. But sometimes, you know, you get into a groove, you get into a rhythm, and there are things that just are kind of calling out to you. And so here recently, you know, being in the summer, it gives us a chance to kind of step back and reflect and look at what's going on in education. And we've had an opportunity to do that. So we've got, I believe, our third or fourth show here in a row that is education themed. And so I, again, was on vacation, and I came across this article that I sent to Mike, and I said, hey, what do you think about this for the show this week? And he said, yeah, this is going to be perfect. It's an article from the Detroit Free Press, and again, kind of relates to what's going on up there. Detroit public schools, much like you could insert any major city school system in the United States and see something similar to this, whether it be Chicago, LA, Dallas, Miami, whatever, even here in Indiana. IPS is struggling with some of these things as well. But really it got to the point where Detroit public schools were in a massive slide in terms of performance, in terms of their facilities, to the point where a lawsuit was filed. And so we're going to be using as the basis for this episode, this article where a judge ruled just within this past week that he said in his ruling on this lawsuit, and I'll kind of explain this here in just a moment, that there is no fundamental right to learn to read and write. And as you can imagine, that's a pretty controversial statement in 2018 when you have a sitting judge saying that you do not have a fundamental, and we'll talk a little bit about phrasing and wording and everything, fundamental right to learn to read and write. What does he mean here? And you hear that on its surface. Again, I know many people, especially those who would be public school advocates, would be outraged about that, right? And so basically this article kind of walks through the lawsuit, what was going on. This was kind of a group of different organizations, the City of Detroit, the American Federation of Teachers, the AFL-CIO, a community group known as 482 Ford, Kappa Delta Phi, the International Literacy Association, and National Association for Multicultural Education, all filed briefs in support of the plaintiffs here that, again, who exactly they were suing here were people in the state, most particularly a dozen state officials, it says, including Governor Rick Snyder, who are wanting to hold them accountable for systemic failures that had deprived Detroit children of their right to literacy. And so this judge, again, comes out and says, look, you don't have a fundamental right to these literacy, the expectation of gaining these literacy standards. And the article goes on to talk a little bit about setting the stage for what's going on. What is this failure in Detroit schools? Again, both curriculum and physical buildings are, the buildings are dilapidated. They're asking for $500 million to be able to boost the curriculum and the physical facilities within Detroit public schools. Of course, there's a narrative in this article here where, this is just being allowed to happen. And surprise, surprise, this is in minority, high poverty area. So again, there's some race overtones in this as well. Pretty much standard stuff as you would probably imagine reading through a mainstream media account of this here. But what I really wanted to focus on, and this is where I want to kind of start to bring Mike in here, this idea, right, that especially in the state of Michigan, there is a constitutional provision that states the means of education shall forever be encouraged. The legislature shall maintain and support a system of free elementary and secondary schools. Talk us up here a little bit, Mike. What obligation does the state, and by the state, I don't necessarily mean the state of Michigan, I mean the government. What role do they have to ensure that they provide this, what many people would say is a fundamental right to learn to read and write? Should we view it that way? And if not, what alternatives exist? Kind of talk us through in your mind what you take out of something like this.
Okay, well, the first thing that I took out of this was, the question being asked is what role does the state, and whether even if it's in a federal or a more local, like the actual state of Michigan, what role does the state have in providing a child with an education? That is absolutely the wrong question to ask. After I read this article, I thought, what role do the teachers and the students have in this? And nowhere in the article does it seem to mention this failure of connection between teacher and student. And I think that this really hits back to what we've been talking about in our previous shows. Yeah, there is a systemic failure, but it's not the one that they're talking about. It's an institutional failure of compulsory education, but I don't want to retread what we already went through. But the interesting thing that I find here is that the left tends to see children as just passive pawns in this process of education. Completely what? Okay, let's say that a kid ends up illiterate, right? Goes through the K through 12 system, and at the end of it does not have the literacy skills to get himself or herself a quality job, however you want to measure it or whatever that means. All they do is talk in broad terms. So I'm using that lingo. If somebody goes through there and they do not have those skills, well, at what point do you look back and say, okay, well, what did the student do? Did the student sit there with their arms crossed for 12 years and not accept the education that was provided in their direction? Did the teacher phone it in October and basically just start handing out worksheets without ever actually trying to make an interpersonal connection with the students? And none of those questions can be asked just by what I read in this lawsuit. At the end here, it says here, and this is in quotes, so I guess this is part of the actual lawsuit, or this might have been a response to the verdict. But it said the state of Michigan's systemic, persistent, and deliberate failure to deliver instruction and tools essential for access to literacy in plaintiff schools, which serve almost exclusively low-income children of color, deprives students of even a fighting chance, the lawsuit said. The state of Michigan did this? With the state, like the physical, geographical state? Who is actually in play in this system of education, in this process of education? Right? There are two primary actors, a teacher and a student, and neither of those are mentioned. And if we want to get even closer, if you look at just the student, there are more secondary actors within the student's sphere of influence, and that's predominantly the student's parents, family structure, what's around them. Right? How often did the parents read to the child when they were a kid? How many words were they exposed to by the time they got to kindergarten? These are all important questions that need to be asked. But when you just want to kick the can to the state of Michigan and Governor Rick Snyder, who is a Republican, but that's the easiest thing in the world to do. And let's just say this broad, undefined term of the state of Michigan failed these kids. Well, that's just hogwash. Right? I mean, whoever filed this lawsuit should have to reimburse the taxpayers for tying up the courts with this absolute garbage, because that's what it is. And this is just flowery language. We've seen a lot of this lately. And I want to talk, if we get to this a little bit later, I want to talk about that socialist, this young girl who won, I forget her name. You know what I'm talking about. She won that primary in Queens, New York. But yes, this is just flowery language that has literally no substance to it at all. It's a waste of time, and it's something that I think was a disservice to the state to tie up our resources that way.
No, yeah, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that too about the family, because that's what I wanted to kind of touch upon. And that's the thing that I kept thinking about here as I'm reading this article is, you know what, this just screams what we talked about before, where we have pawned over the responsibility of rearing a child to the state. Now, obviously, in this regard, we're talking about in education, and some of you might out there say, well, yeah, isn't that the expectation that I should have in sending my kid off to the public school system, that they be educated? But I would argue, first and foremost, that no, you shouldn't put all of your faith into a system that clearly is failing, right? I mean, no matter which side of the argument you're on here, there's a failure, right? Whether you want to call it systemic or a failure of people or a failure of whatever it might be, there is a failure here, okay? So why would you want to put your faith into a system that is failing? So what I would do is I would say, okay, well, what is it that I can be doing as the parent of this child? As you adequately mentioned, how much are you reading to your child? How much are you taking on the onus? It's your responsibility. And this kind of mindset that we've settled into, that it's somebody else's responsibility. It's somebody else's responsibility to fix that problem or to provide this service for me. I don't want to have any role in bringing out a solution here. So many people, and this really, really irritates me a lot. I've seen hints of this recently on some Facebook posts from some public education, people in public education, some teachers who will talk about, oh, well, you're in the suburb areas where you have lots of money and you've got, all kinds of support systems and things of that nature. These people live in the inner city and they don't have family members. They may be single parents, or they may be being raised by a sibling, and yada, yada, yada. Okay, well, then it's your responsibility and my responsibility as citizens of this country to step up and help those people out. And it doesn't get done by throwing a wad of cash at the system. It doesn't get done by throwing $500 million to a system that's already sunk millions and billions of dollars. Why in the world would I want to give $500 million more to this system? That is
not just that, Justin. Detroit doesn't have it. The state of Michigan doesn't. They don't have it. I mean, you can just come up with whatever number you want. I mean, why not just a billion, trillion dollars? They don't have it.
The last time I was up in the city of Detroit, no joke, I'm driving around and my wife's cousin is taking us around, and there's a building that high rise that was being built, and there was construction equipment. He goes, yeah, that's the city jail. It's just been sitting like that because they ran out of money midway through building it. They literally did not, and the city council would not approve any more money for it. So you get this half-built building that's just sitting there. But and again, so I say, if you want to lecture me about how underfunded, and I would love to debate that, right? Because again, why 500 million? Like you said, why not 1 billion? Why not 2 billion? How come this arbitrary number of 500 million? How would that magically bring these schools up to par? That's what it says, $500 million to bring schools up to par. Define par here. Right? Who gets to set what par is? When you go out and you play a golf course, par is defined by the golf course. It's partly by the yardage and things of that nature. Who gets to decide what that is? So again, if you want to lecture me about why schools in general need more money, you're going to have to do a lot more clarifying as to what that's going to do and how that's going to help. And you know what? Again, if you want to look at this and say, here's the problem, okay, that's fine. Well, then you be a part of the solution. We are commanded to love our neighbors and to be there to help each other out. And even if you don't have a Christian worldview and moral code, even if you're atheistic, it's just the right thing to do to help people out. So until you're telling me that you're getting up off your keister and going out there and helping other people out, I don't want to hear it. Throwing more money at the problem isn't going to be a solution to this problem. And I just found that the most infuriating thing in this article here is the lack of, as you said, acknowledgement of the family structure here in terms of their role and responsibility in ensuring that these kids are literate here. Now, I want to turn back here real quick and get your input on this. Let's focus in real quickly here on this idea of a fundamental right to literacy. We talked last week, Mike, about the idea of schooling versus education. So talk us through a little bit about your viewpoint here on how you come down on this. I mean, clearly, I think no matter where you're at on this, we would all agree that yes, it is, no matter even if you wanted to go work at a fast food job or you wanted a CEO position, having some degree of literacy for civic engagement. That's one of the things that they highlight in this article, just being a citizen and engaging in civic duty, you got to be literate to do that. And agreed, 100%. But what fundamental right do you have to that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think that's a stretch to of course, and I think the judge clearly got it right. I think it's a stretch to say that you have a right insofar as you can sue the state of Michigan if you end up illiterate. I mean, I think that that's bogus from the outset. But again, I think that the biggest problem here is if you are not literate, who has violated the right? That's going to be the toughest thing to prove in a court of law. And I think that's probably what the plaintiffs were unable to do. So who violated the right? Well, it should start with the individual. Again, Justin, we get these kids when they're 15. All right. At this point, you know what it takes in order to succeed. You know what you have to do or not do. You know, if you come in and you put your headphones in, or you put your hood over your head and you put your head down and you take a nap. If that's the case, is the state still responsible for you not being literate? Well, what about the parents? What if the parents don't read to you? What if the parents don't get you a library card? What if the parents don't reinforce the value in literacy when you're a kid, and so you just never grow up with that value? Do you sue them? Well, what if the teacher, again, what if the teacher didn't do it? What if the principal didn't set a conditions, a culture within the building where learning is fun, where it's something that is actively pursued and engaged in. And what if within the classroom the teacher's not doing it? They have, in this lawsuit, bypassed all of those things. The four things that would be actually closest to the element in question, literacy, the four things that would be closest: the student, the family, the teacher, the principal. And they've bypassed all of that, and they've just gone to the physical state and said, we're going to sue Michigan. I mean, it is, I mean, when you sent this to me, my head almost exploded, Justin.
Yeah,
I don't, I'm going to take a deep breath. You go.
No, you're absolutely right. I think what it equates to is somebody trying to claim false advertising, and that just doesn't hold up here, right? Because guess what? There's no free choice. There's no choice in public education. Now, if you wanted to say, hey, I live in Spearsville, and over in Margeson Town, they've got a school over there that is just top notch. It's, gets rave reviews. I want to pay to send my kid over there. Now, if I've made a conscious choice and I'm paying to send my kid over to that school, and you don't deliver on what you've told me that you will do, like if you say, hey, I will have your sons reading at this level by this point, and they'll be performing this kind of math, and they'll be able to produce this kind of work, and you can't deliver to that, then you have failed to live up. And then I can say, nope, I'm done. I'm withdrawing them. I'm taking them, and I'm taking my money somewhere else. But when my kids are told just based off geographically where they live, they're going to go to this school and this is what they're going to do, then I don't have a leg to stand on in terms of being able to say it's false advertising, or, like going into a restaurant saying, oh, the burger looks like that on the menu, but it came out and it looks like this. Okay, I can take my business somewhere else. Okay, in the public school system, that doesn't exist, right? And as you accurately pointed out, how in the world can you pinpoint the blame here? Is it the kindergarten teacher? Is it the first grade teacher? Is it the second grade teacher? Is it a accumulation of all of these teachers? What role does administration have to play in this? What is the state standards? I mean, it would just be literally impossible, as you said, to be able to pinpoint where the blame would fall on something like this, in addition to, as you accurately pointed out, all the other variables, the student themselves. That's why I think these outcome based standards that we see in education today are so inane. The No Child Left Behind thing is an absolute disaster, where you say, okay, every kid is going to be able to do this that doesn't work that way, because not every kid is created the same. And, you'll find people that are pro public education, we'll be having this conversation. Yeah, we're on board with you on that. But then when you start talking about solutions or what it should look like, it's like you just hit a roadblock and you just go in complete separate ways as to how you should go about resolving that problem.
Yeah, it's funny to me how on the left, diversity is like the key word. I mean, this is just like this is what drives every thought in their mind. Yet every solution they have is monolithic, as if every single person is the exact same and can be fixed with this one piece of legislation by these two elitists who are going to write it. Through the mouth, it's diverse, 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 diverse. Everybody's different. Everybody's different. We have to accept that. And then just these monolithic legislation and just that treats every single person as they're like a building block. And it's just, it's befuddling.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said that too, the word that you brought up there, legislative, because down toward the end of the article, one of the gentlemen who they interviewed for this was an official, and he said that that he thinks that the state of Michigan has to address this legislatively. He said officials want to address the disparities in educational opportunities for children. We've got to do it legislatively. I have a real big issue with that, because I don't see any good coming out of trying to fix this problem through legislation. All that's going to do is add more burden to a system that's already burdened by red tape and already has enough politicians involved in it already. Many of you have never spent any time at all in a classroom and wouldn't know the first thing about running a daily lesson plan for a class. And so I think that's the complete wrong attitude here. I think, again, when we always try to come back here to talking about solutions, we can all say, okay, clearly there's a problem here. How does something like this get, fixed then? As you've probably picked up on, at least, from my perspective here, it gets fixed by community involvement. It gets fixed, when my grandfather was alive, he ran a tutoring service out of a local church on the west side of Indianapolis. And he brought in probably about 4 or 5 students a week that would rotate through and did this kind of thing. It was flashcard math. It was just kind of drilling facts in, but it was things that it was like these fundamental things that they needed. It was, reading historical passages or books, and then, critical thinking type things that these kids needed that they weren't getting in the classroom. Either they weren't getting it because it wasn't being provided, or it didn't suit their learning style. And they needed this regimented system where they were free from all of the different distractions in the classroom. And not every student that came through had success, but, I even remember as a kid seeing some kids come through, and they would come back and visit my grandfather, and they would say, hey, I made it. I was able to overcome. Those community solutions are so important. And again, I want to challenge those who, sit in suburbia and preach about what has to be done, and the only thing that you can think of are solutions through the state. To be a part of the solution, go out and tutor, go out and help, go into the inner cities and meet with these people and try to help them and provide solutions for them yourselves. That's what's going to overcome a crisis like this, not throwing more money to an already broken system.
It's a really interesting point you made there at the end. Unfortunately, in schools, we've had to deal with this. It seems like an epidemic, but it's actually more sensationalized. But this epidemic of mass shootings that we see at schools. And, people, we've talked about this before, but people want to kick the can down the road. And you mentioned this in a casual conversation I had with you, Justin. You had said, if you want to do something, go put your arm around somebody who looks troubled, and ask them how they're feeling or what they're doing or how they are. Take somebody who looks like they could be on the fence and get them involved in community service. Go take them and go do some volunteer work for an hour and watch how that changes them. But that stuff is difficult. That's something that like students can do. Well, what do teachers have them doing? Well, making a poster, with a gun with a circle around it and a line through it. It's just, the lack of individual, personal, local, individual responsibility is just, it's gone. It's not even, it's an afterthought.
No, you're absolutely right. And I want to talk about that a little bit more here in our bonus time. We're coming up against the break for our radio audience on WCVL 1550 92.1, WCVLAM.com. But for those that are listening on demand through an app, I want to pick this up over here on the other side of the break, because I think you raise an important point here that doesn't get talked about nearly enough when you hear these issues of, trauma and crisis in schools. And certainly this relates to it. But what you were mentioning there as well is really important. So again, for those of you listening on radio, thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Other Side. Hope you can tune back in again next week. All right, for those of you that have hung on here on YouTube or are listening on demand, Mike, you brought up an excellent point right there. I think it's my time in the classroom, and I'm not a traditional teacher. I come from the corporate world where I spent the first about 6 to 8 years of my working life working in sales jobs and marketing jobs and things of that nature. My time in the classroom has taught me a lot about people, more than probably I got from working, with people on a day in, day out basis. I saw the good and bad in people when I was in sales and marketing. Being in the classroom, though, has shown me a different side of, I think, more of society as a whole. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And, I probably have been up close and personal with obviously more trauma related type things. And I find it fascinating to sit back from the distance. And I haven't, fortunately, had a ton. I mean, we've had, obviously some students in our community that have suffered and gone through some tragedies and things of that nature. How distant people are from really caring and showing what an emotional response should be. I guess what I'm trying to say here is this. We get commanded as teachers to do A, B, and C when a tragedy occurs. But in none of that A, B, and C, in my opinion, is there a human element to it. It's, hey, if they're struggling, pass them on to a counselor. Or here's a list of things that you can say. Here's a list of things that you can't say. But yet then we're kind of told we want to come across as caring and loving and keeping an eye on them. And you know what I'm saying? It seems, I guess, the only way I can say this is disingenuous. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think you're right. I think it's robotic, but that's what they're trying to make teachers, is they're just basically trying to make them into robots. And the more that you cede power, educational power to the state, the more you have to streamline the process of actually teaching or educating, or in this case, just making a personal connection. Like now what we're having to do is we are having to cede our best judgment when you have a real human person-to-person moment in front of you. You have to go to the script. And I think just based upon where we work, I think you're right. You know what you were saying, based upon where we work, this is it's just like a factory of emotion, of lines, of things to say, of processes. It's like automated.
Yeah, and let me be clear about this. That is not meant to be an attack on the people that I work with. That is not what I'm saying at all. No, and I just want to be clear when I say that. But I just feel like we struggle so much. And again, this goes back to the systemic failure of public education. You can't, we're cautioned, about having any kind of relationship with students, but yet at the same time, we're supposed to be a support group with them. We're told you can say this, but you can't say that. We're told that you have to be the eyes and ears of what's going on in their life, but then you got to report it and turn it over to somebody else. And oh, by the way, we can't fill you in because of privacy concerns about what's going on with them. So, it's really standard for us to have kids experiencing real trauma in our classroom, and we might not even know about it because A, B, and C can't share it with us, right? Because of HIPAA and things of that nature. But yet then we're told, well, then you need to know what's going on with these kids. It's just so contradictory and so convoluted, so much red tape. We have lost the human element here. We have lost the ability to be able to say, hey, and it's just amazing. Just, when I talk to the kids, we're coming up at, like you said, up on a new school year here. When I start talking to the kids at the beginning of the year and I just treat them like I'm a human being, they're shocked by that, Mike.
Yeah.
They are absolutely shocked. What, whoa, you speak to us like, we're preteens and we're teens and we're entering into adulthood. Yeah, I do. I'm going to treat you like that. I'm going to treat you like a human being. I'm going to afford you the dignity and opportunity to live like a human being and not a robot. And that's a shock to them, like you were saying.
Yeah, it is. And I want to say it to the people listening here, and I'm just, Justin's not paying me to say this, but Justin is very, very well liked by the students, and he hasn't been here that long. But I have noticed that. I mean, things that certainly that they don't show me, but I think most of the staff, students just giving him like thank yous and, personal like notes. Hey, you made a difference in my life. Just these small tokens that we have kind of lost their way because again, of this just automated process of the institution. You haven't seeded that at all. And really I have, but the students recognize that and they really, really like it. They really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that. And I do. I tell them all the time, we have candid conversations in the classroom. We talk about what's going on in life, beyond just, hey, you're here to learn about U.S. government or economics or whatever it might be. And, I think they appreciate that because so much of that has been removed from classical schooling. It's a shock to the system when they get somebody that takes time to hear about what's going on in their life. And I'm not diminishing again any of my colleagues at all. I'm talking more about the system at large, and just how there's very little time for that, and it's shunned upon, and there's just no room for it in the bell-to-bell instruction that we have to keep, and the standards that we have to teach, and things of that nature. And so I think it's refreshing to the kids. I certainly am not perfect, and I tell them that all the time. And they get to see that. They get to see. I
tell them you are perfect.
Yeah, that's right. But they get to see the flaws, and I think again they appreciate that. And so yeah, I just think that when you tie this back in, right, to the article that we were referring to, and I was so happy to hear you kind of bring up the tragedies and things of that nature, because it is also related. It's the system of the road that public schooling has led us down to that has failed these kids. And to a large degree, those who are parents of kids now, they experience the same thing. And so again, I think, with so much emphasis on work careers and, everything in the schedule of what the hustle and bustle of a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly work schedule, it's easy to just turn the reins over completely to the school system, and in the summertime to school, extra programs and camps and things like that, and let those become the parent and let them become wholly responsible. And then when people see the results and they go, holy cow, what's going on here? And then you said, wait a second, where's my responsibility in this? Where do I take the onus of having to help raise my child, in a way that I see best fit for them to be successful as well? I think that's something that we as a society have to look in the mirror and say, we've got to reclaim that. We've got to take that back. It's great for the school to provide this service. I don't know that, as we've said before, that it's ideal, but it certainly shouldn't supplant your role as a parent in making sure that your child is ready to live their adult lives.
Amen. Well put.
Well, before we wrap up this episode, Mike, is there anything else on the radar from this past week? I know we had obviously the news of Supreme Court justice and things of that nature. Anything that you wanted to touch upon before we wrap up?
I got a couple of things in my notes that were kind of like, we'll get to it if we get to it. Looks like we just got a couple of minutes here. I did bring up that Ocasio-Cortez girl who won, she's 28. Well, she's like a girl, but she won as a Democratic socialist over a heavily favored incumbent in Queens. And I was listening to some of her rhetoric, and it just kind of struck me when we were talking about this lawsuit from the Detroit Public Schools, where they were trying to, put the onus on the state and say, well, we need $500 million to do this. And again, this flowery language. I was reading an article from the New York Post, and it's just some of the stuff that she was saying about, I'm trying to find it here, the words that she was using, like everybody should have access to, quote, dignified healthcare. What does that even mean? How can you legislate something? How can that be your platform? And how do voters fall for that? She said that they should have the ability, everybody should have the ability to send their children to college, that no one should feel, quote, precarious or unstable in their pursuit of housing. What in the world does that mean? I mean, this is stunning. She said here, the definition of democratic socialism, when asked what it was that the fact that in a modern, moral, and wealthy society, no American should be too poor to live. Well, what about the American that spends all their money on drugs and ends up on the street?
Yeah.
Should they be too poor to live? I mean, it's exactly like the article that you brought up, and now we see it on a federal level. And for crying out loud, this almost became the president in 2016. The amount of if the Democratic Party wasn't so heavily rigged and corrupt, Bernie Sanders would have won the Democratic nomination, should have won the Democratic nomination, and may have even become president. But this is all that is saying, you put your hands behind your back or in your pocket. You say, I'm not doing anything, and I'm kicking it over to the state. And if I end up a little bit aggrieved over anything, I'm going to blame the state. Zero accountability whatsoever. The fact that she got elected and then listening to her platform and the things she said, this is so disheartening to me. I mean, it's people in New York City, so like they're all idiots anyway, so I kind of get it. But, you know, I mean, it's getting a little close here. I mean, seriously.
No, you're right. You're right. I mean, there's been all kinds of statistics that show the rise, especially among millennials, of the acceptance of socialism, if not outright communism. And it is frightening to see that there is a growing, especially when you take it in account too, with the mass amount of youth that are leaving the church. Especially after, you know, they graduate from high school and into college, they're not going back. That what does that mean? Why are you bringing this in, Spears? Well, because it ties hand in hand. Because if you're not going to place your faith in the church and the principles of Christianity or of any kind of, you know, religious moral fabric, what are you going to place it in? You're going to place it in man. You're going to place your faith in humanity, which, if you haven't been paying attention throughout history, has a pretty miserable track record. And so when you look at what these socialist communist regimes, whether you see what's going on in Venezuela right now or what's going on historically in other places, and of course,
you mean where they're cooking zoo animals because they don't have anything to eat?
Right. And they have like 4,000 trillion% inflation or whatever it is.
40,000% inflation.
Oh, it's ridiculous. And yeah, you know, and so of course the haters will say, well, that's not true communism. That's not true socialism. That's, you know, whatever. But the reality is, guys, that really the only thing that's going to ever trump and win this is freedom and liberty. Freedom and liberty, and having the ability to determine, self-determine, make your own path. That's really what we need. And we just need more people to grasp hold of that and run with it. And it is frightening when you see more people turning to ideas like what you just went through there. That is pretty frightening.
You know, it's interesting you brought up the religious aspect of it. A lot of leftists tell me that Jesus was a socialist. I've heard that over and over. I tell you what, I haven't read the Bible cover to cover, but I've been through it enough. And I have never seen ceding your liberties to the state for anything. I just don't remember that being a theme. You're probably a little bit better versed than I. Am I wrong?
Oh, no. And I'll tell you what, I just had not an argument, but a back and forth dialogue on my Facebook the other day with some people that talked about freedom and where it comes from. And there were people that were talking about, you know, freedom being a privilege and freedom being, you know, one at the point of a gun. And we got to thank those who have served. And they're the reason that we're free today. The whole freedom isn't free thing. And my point that I fired back was, freedom and liberty are God-granted natural rights. You don't get your freedom because some standing army gives it to you. Now, they may protect it, and we can have a dialogue and a discussion about whether or not our armed forces are actually protecting our freedom and liberty. And again, that's not a knock against them. That's a knock against, surprise, surprise. Yeah, the state that misuses them so often in the name of protecting freedom and liberty. But once you seeded that idea and that thinking that you enjoy your liberty and freedom simply because the government allows it, or that some standing army is there to protect it, therefore they're the grantor of it, you might as well surrender all of your freedoms, because you literally cannot draw a line then to warrant the federal government from saying we have a right to do A, B, and C because we are the grantor of freedom and liberty.
Well, it's just like saying they own you. They might as well own you.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, as we always say on here, guys, you know, when you find yourself indoctrinated like that, whether it's right or left, you've got to do some re-education, some unlearning. You got to unpack some of these things, and it is brutal to go through. It's difficult to admit that you have fallen victim to this thinking and this mindset. And it takes a while to get, you know, as as one of my favorite hosts, Mark Kreslins and Mike Church, used to say, to unplug the matrix cable from the back of your head and take that pill and see, wow, my eyes are opened. I see this now. It's all around me. I never noticed it before. It is like a whole new worldview. So that's what we in part try to do here on the other side. And again, all of the broadcast shows that we have through the Cerberus Radio Network, I think, are on par with that as well. So that's going to do it for our episode today. I want to again thank Mike. Thanks for being flexible here today with getting this done, and really appreciated the time and going through this.
Likewise.
Yeah, this has been great. So thanks for tuning in this week, and we hope that you can be with us again next week when we bring you yet another episode of The Other Side.
Thanks for listening. And remember, you're not fully informed until you've heard the other side.
All right, man. Hey, I have just real quick before I have to run.